possible.
Now, I like that expression, cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And cryptocurrencies. What is to stop banks from creating their own cryptocurrency? And what is so wonderful about Bitcoin in comparison to other cryptocurrencies?
Now, that's a great question. There's nothing to stop them. In fact, they're already doing it.
They are?
Yes. First of all, you've got to realize there's more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies already.
1,000?
Yes, more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies.
What's the worst one? What's the one we should avoid?
That list is almost 900 long.
Oh, 900 of them that suck.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long tail, right? There's a couple that are interesting that offer different perspectives. But we're seeing a lot of private institutions interested in creating their own. And there's nothing stopping them from doing that. But they have to make a fundamental choice. They can either create something that is controlled, contained, with specific outlines and borders, with controlled access, permissioned access, as they would call it. And that, by definition, is not global. It can't be global. It has to be contained within a specific jurisdiction, because that's how they operate. Both corporations and banks operate within specific jurisdictions. So they can do that. But then it has to be closed to innovation, closed to permission, and not global and transnational. And so what Bitcoin has, and not just Bitcoin, but any public, open cryptocurrency of a global nature like Bitcoin, is that you don't need to ask permission to join. You don't need to ask permission to innovate. You don't need to ask permission to create a new application. And any application you write will instantaneously work anywhere in the world to anyone without permission. That's the magic of Bitcoin. And if you think about it, that's also the magic of the internet. That's why the internet has been successful, because it allows anyone to join without permission, connect to any application or service they want, write an application, and launch it globally without asking the phone company if they're allowed to do that. There's no one to ask permission from. And to extend that analogy, they also tried to build private internets. And they're still trying. CompuServe, AOL, Prodigy, and the early closed networks that had their own content that you could connect to that weren't part of the internet. And then after that, corporate intranets. Have you heard of the intranet term?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you have an internal network within a company that has stale content, crappy applications, and doesn't talk to the rest of the world and is behind firewalls, that's an intranet. Intra. And they've built those, and they sometimes serve very useful purposes, but they're not the internet. And you can't scale them and make them secure and make them useful enough.
So essentially that would exactly be what would happen with money if local banks or national banks.
Yes. So to follow from the title, the Internet of Money is a very powerful expression because it really explains what this is. This is the Internet of Money, which means it's open, borderless, global, and requires no permission to participate. And people will try to create the intranet of money. And it will have all of the limitations that the traditional banking system has. So yes, they can come along and do that. And the nice thing is that people don't have to make a choice to use one or the other. The only system of monopoly we have is that you have to use the national currency of the country you were born in and you live in order to pay the government of that country. Other than that, you're free to use any currency you want anywhere. Some of us are free. Many of us are not. And Bitcoin fits into that model. It's the, if you want to use it for this particular use, use it.
Well, if you extrapolate where all this stuff is going, if you look at, I mean, if you're correct, and if over the next 20 years, Bitcoin really does emerge as not just an acceptable currency worldwide, but it's right up there with everything else. And maybe even preferred by a lot of people that are in the know or tech savvy or what have you. If that really does take place, it's going to slowly but surely erode a lot of the major problems that we have with society today, as far as this government having massive amounts of control over the economy, and the banks being the ones who sort of enforce the kind of laws that have allowed the mortgage crises and allowed these bubbles to occur, and also to fund and help fund the politicians that enable them to keep these laws in place. I mean, all of that sort of is, a lot of it is because of power. And a lot of that power is going to go away if something like cryptocurrencies emerge as being the predominant way that we use and exchange money.
That's the optimistic way to look at it.
Yeah.
The less optimistic way to look at it is that over the next decade, we are going to gradually move into a cashless digital money society.
We're kind of doing that now with like Apple Pay.
We are
and stuff,
doing
right?
that already.
Google
And there are
Pay.
some countries that are completely cashless.
Really? Where?
That are very close to completely cashless. Ironically, one of the countries that has a very high degree of digital money is Kenya.
Kenya.
Because of M-Pesa, which is the mobile money they have, which has now taken over a significant percentage of the GDP.
Really?
We're also seeing in Scandinavian countries now cash is less than 8% of the productive use of money.
So they're using credit cards, is what you're saying.
Credit, debit, mobile pay, Apple.
Well, what is Kenya's M-Pay? What is that?
M-Pesa is text message
M-Pesa?
money.
Text message money.
Yeah, it's money you can send through SMS. It started off as basically people exchanging minutes, mobile minutes, that were transferable by SMS. And they started using it as currency, and then eventually it became officially a corresponding currency to the Kenyan pesa.
And now it's the predominant currency?
In most places, from what I understand, I haven't been to Kenya, but I've talked to a lot of Kenyans who tell me, yeah, we all use that and only that. We don't use cash. We don't use credit cards.
Wow.
It is kind of shocking, but here's the problem. The problem is we are going to a digital currency society where cash will be gradually eradicated, either through non-use, or a lot of countries and a lot of governments are trying to actively ban it. So they're putting limits on how much you can use cash, say, $1,000, and if it's more than $1,000, using cash is illegal. When we go to this society, we have to really think about the implications. Do we want a society in which our digital money is under complete surveillance and complete control, where if you go to the wrong protest, or if you support the wrong political campaign, or if you make a payment to the wrong person or receive money from the wrong person, suddenly your money disappears. It's no longer yours anymore. It's frozen, it's seized, it's gone. And someone has control of that. Corporations, banks, governments, and in most cases, there is no difference between corporation, bank, and government, right? And so that's one scenario. And the other scenario is one in which individuals control their money. And it is digital money, but it's digital cash like Bitcoin, where you can pay an individual from one person to another, just like I can with cash today, without any other party getting involved. What really strikes me as amazing is that we've gotten used to this idea so quickly, which is that we no longer pay people. We no longer pay people directly. The less we use cash, the more we pay people through a corporation, right? So from tipping your valet to tipping your taxi driver to tipping wherever, tipping is pretty much the last remaining part of our society where cash is used to pay from one person who is not an incorporated entity to another person who is not an incorporated entity. Everything else you have to pay through a corporation, whether it's a bank, right? Whether it's Venmo, whether it's PayPal, whether it's any of those things. And we've gradually gotten used to this environment where we can't pay another person unless there's a corporation involved. And that's astonishing to me. And as cash disappears, that then becomes a final fact, that every single payment in your life will be from you to a corporation.
And that corporation takes a piece of that,
And
every single thing.
And not just that, it doesn't just take